Road to Segregation and Beyond is the title for this particular screencast. I'm going to be looking at connections from the 1800s to the Civil Rights Movement and beyond. In class, you were asked to answer this particular question: does America have a history of unfairness in Congress and the courts? And I want you to use some of the events that we are currently studying, like the American Revolution, the Three-Fifths Compromise, and so on. Keep in mind that Malcolm X said in a 1961 interview that for 400 years, and this comes up repeatedly, 400 years of suffering. So I want to just kind of look at that question. I'm going to be asking this question several times, and I will be changing this as we progress through the Civil Rights Movement. I want to introduce you to Latasha Harlins. If you're not familiar with this case, Latasha Harlins.
Probation, no jail time.
And it sends a bad message to the community.
Merchant Sue Jadu was convicted of voluntary manslaughter. Her sentence, 5 years probation.
So Sue Jadu, if you didn't notice, shoots Latasha Harlins in the back of the head and gets probation. And this is one of the sparks to the LA riots in the 90s. What's interesting, though, is her father's response when the verdict is given.
Who takes a gun from under the counter. Dew claims she accidentally pulled the trigger, killing the teenager. Members of the black community charged the shooting was racially motivated. Dew was convicted, but served no prison time. Dew's store was later firebombed.
I would like for you, the black community, to see once again, you can have a black person killed with a video with eyewitnesses, and this is what you'll get.
Killed inside a Korean on groceries.
He would say as he was leaving the courtroom, once again, blacks being treated unfairly by this system. So let's make this transition to the Civil War. And again, we are in the 1800s, and I'm just trying to make that connection as far as legislative changes and court decisions and violence targeting African Americans, that there's something that has historically been going on with regard to this treatment. And, as we are here in the 1800s, looking at this Civil War map, I'm just trying to, point out some of those particular points. So we already know that the South has seceded from the Union, and we looked at the Emancipation Proclamation and how Lincoln is concerned about the border states, trying to keep them on the north side. And there's a debate about whether or not the Emancipation Proclamation really freed the slaves or not. We addressed that last class. If you're lost on some of this stuff, because we are transitioning to the Reconstruction period, which is the time after the Civil War, you can go to the site and take a look at this particular reading, which is something we would have completed in class. We also would have completed these scenarios in class where you would have teamed up with a partner and you would have been asked these questions. Below is a list of historic concerns held by former slave masters. Below is a list of historic concerns held by freed slaves. Like, what do you do now? Do you have any money? What are you going to do when somebody asks you to do something? You are now in a position where you are free. You no longer have to listen. Look at this one. Your former slaves want you to work for you doing the same job as he did as a slave. You ask him to pick cotton and he responds, no, and yo mama. What do? During the days of slavery, you probably could resort to slave breaking, but now the 13th through 15th Amendment, you can no longer do such things. You have to guarantee equality, you have to free the slaves, and the issue of voting will be addressed later on. So we would have completed those particular tasks. If you remember the Civil War, at the end, this was addressed last class, the South is trying to obtain home rule. At the end of the Civil War, the South is cut up into these military districts, District 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We know that there are 3 amendments that were passed: no slavery, equal citizenship, and then the freed slave is allowed to vote. So this is going to be viewed as the federal government forcing the states to address this legislation. And the Southern goal here is to figure out a loophole around the law. What laws are we talking about? These particular pieces right here. So let's look at this particular graphic. What I did is I've placed a soldier a freed slave, and a couple of Klansmen. We know that we have these three amendments that are passed. Well, the North positions troops in the South to make sure that these individuals do not target these individuals and violate any of their particular rights. And this is going to be viewed as, again, the federal government trying to overstep, which is going right back to that particular point. Remember, the goal here is loopholes. That's where the 1876 election comes in. These three states have electoral votes. We take a look at the popular vote, seems fairly close. The electoral vote also close. So these three states, which are in the South, are going to broker a deal. They're claiming that there's a dispute with their electoral votes, and they're going to make a deal to throw their votes to Hayes in exchange for the removal of these federal troops, which would mean it's going to be open season on these individuals, which is why you're going to see a surge in violence directed towards the freed slave. So those federal troops probably necessary. And this is going to lead to segregation and a host of other issues. Remember, the goal here is to find a loophole around the law. When we look here at the 15th Amendment, I know you're familiar with grandfather clauses and, poll tax, literacy tests. Those are always around this particular piece of legislation. The federal government is trying to say, hey, the freed slave is allowed to vote. Well, our state laws say they can vote. They've just figured out a loophole around the law, but it's on the condition that they can pass the literacy test, they can pay the poll tax, whatever. So again, these are state laws, but keep in mind the federal government isn't doing anything to challenge those particular state laws. So what you're going to see is a series of new segregation laws that are going to come into existence, which is the point of this particular class here. Let's take a look at the 14th Amendment with Plessy Ferguson. You have a state that's talking about a white passenger car, and the goal here is to figure out whether or not there's a violation of the 13th and 14th Amendment. So the 14th Amendment is saying, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. Understand that the person does get in the state from one place to another. The state's argument is going to be, well, we never said they couldn't get on this particular train. We just said they had to sit in a particular car designated for their race. They still get to point A, from point A to point B, a loophole around the piece of legislation. So these are going to get progressively worse as we look at the voting loophole. Now we're looking at this particular loophole, which is going to lead to segregation. So in class, I want you to take a look at some of these segregation laws to really point out the extent that these states are going to go to. So if we look at here, burial, the officer in charge shall not bury or allow to be buried any colored person, like at death. They've come up with a state law in Georgia to make sure the races are segregated. Amateur baseball. This one says that you cannot play within 2 blocks of a playground. Railroads, restaurants, pools and billiards, circus tickets. All of these segregation laws are the outcome of home rule. Think about how maybe these laws would not have come into existence if the federal government maintained the districts in the South. Circus tickets. This is interesting. So somebody has to come up with a rule of law, where we at in Louisiana, for circus tickets. And the issue here is they do not want people selling circus tickets in the same booth. That you have to have 2 entrances to the said performance with individual ticket takers. And they have to, for some reason, be 25 feet apart. Not exactly sure as to why. What about this one? It's unlawful to conduct a restaurant for serving of food at which white and colored people are served in the same room. So here is your restaurant. This is going to be your task here. This is your restaurant. And you have to comply with this state law in Alabama. So they want you to create a partition that's 7 feet higher, and unless a separate entrance from the street is provided for each compartment. So what I want you to do is you can pause this in a second and just try to figure out, draw a line, figure out how would you go about creating your wall? This is your restaurant. What are you going to do? So pause it and think about that. Not sure what you've come up with, but let's just say I spent $8,000 and I came up with this partition. Am I in compliance? Okay, well, let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I'm not in compliance. This is not separate but equal. This is unequal. We have only 6 tables here. So this has cost me $8,000. Let's just say I go to your restaurant and I decide, you know what, you are not complying with this law in Alabama. You need to make this separate but equal. So now you have to tear this down and comply with the law. Let's just say it looks like that. Are you in compliance? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. They seem to have more. No, sorry, you're not in compliance. Tear it down again. Notice my cost. What about this one? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't know if you figured this out, but if you wound up with your division and you, let's say you just kind of went like this, you better have 4, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You better have 4 round tables, or I'm going to say you are in compliance. So with mine, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 square tables. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's equal. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I've put an entrance or a door here. I've placed a door here for staff to get into this particular area. And notice how I have, if you come into this area, you can still access this bathroom. I don't know if you factored that in. And if you come here, you can still access this bathroom. So I've come up with numerous ways. I don't know why I'd have this door just going nowhere. It's weird. So look at my cost, $17,000 in cost to tear down. So this is definitely being an issue. So the conclusion here. There is tension between the federal and state governments. They seem to be going back and forth, and that is something that we will focus on as we move into the civil rights movement. And the goal here is to always find a loophole around the laws. I did a Google search for Reconstruction, which is the time after the Civil War. Notice how it says it was a significant chapter for American civil rights. The goal to get home rule, which is another way to say states' rights. This has specific meaning in history. And for the next couple classes, we're going to be trying to make this connection here. So going back to the question, does America have a history of unfairness in Congress and in the courts? Think about these segregation laws. What is fair about them? What is not fair? So you could take some of those segregation laws and maybe replace it with the question evidence from last class. You could place them here. And notice how I'm trying to make a link to some of these cases in the civil rights movement and beyond. This is a video clip looking at the reaction from the OJ verdict. Let's see what these people do.
I think it's great. He deserves to go free. They have no evidence.
To deliberate for as short as they did and come back with a not guilty verdict, I think it shows the jury was pretty irresponsible. And money can buy you justice, exactly.
So at the OJ verdict, there was this belief that, people white were very upset and people black were happy. Like for the first time, the courts worked in favor for African Americans. So just think about that. And let's take a look at some of the videos. I wanted you to watch this one here. I have it queued up, hopefully.
At war's end, Southern state legislatures passed measures designed to maintain white superiority. These laws, known as black codes, severely curtailed the newly freed slaves' civil rights. In effect, returning them to a state of bondage and making them second-class citizens.
I think right there is the important part. This is an interesting one. This comes from a documentary, Hip Hop in the LA Riots. And I just want you to think about this one response from this individual. So I'll let this play here.
Right now, and I see Reginald Denny's gravel truck.
Last but not least, I must be real. Number 10 is my appetite to kill.
At 6:45 p.m., Henry Watson spotted Reginald Denny driving west on Florence in his truck.
He was in a vehicle capable of smashing through this intersection, but he chose not to for whatever reason, and in him doing so, he suffered that vicious attack.
Which was just horrifying.
This is attempted murder.
It was just chilling. I was certain that I was watching somebody die. And then the news person in me was thinking, oh my God, I just got the bookend video to the Rodney King beating.
And if you look at the Reginald Denny, it looks just like Rodney King. I'm not saying that he deserved it, but neither did Rodney King.
If you perpetrate violence against other people, you need to expect that at some point, like a boomerang, that violence is gonna come back on you. So I didn't shed a tear for Reginald Denny. He shouldn't have been in that truck in that neighborhood at that time. That's unfortunate. Just like it was unfortunate for Rodney King.
Terrible, terrible pictures. All this guy did was enter this area. That's his only crime.
Were you looking at him like a human being at that time, or was he just didn't register that way?
No. No.
What was he to you?
Nothing.
Okay, he's moving.
I mean, you know, do I regret what? Do I regret what? April 29th, or his ass whooping? What do I regret what? What are you asking me? What
Do you regret pulling him from the car and holding his neck down while the other people beat him?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know.
Kill the mother. No! Why don't kill him? No, don't kill him. When they start shooting, but when that many get on you, honey, your ass is grass.
What can I say? I mean, you know, nobody anticipated that. You know, look at the footage. Everybody was crazy. It was chaotic. You know, nobody was in their right mind. If they were, they wouldn't have been out there in the first place. You know, it was extremely unfortunate. You know, but I think, like they say in rebellions, revolutions, or sacrifices have to be made. You know, it's going to be some bloodshed. You know, it's not going to always be dialogue. We're tired of marching and talking all that. You got to get some results, some bloodshed. We must know we mean business. You know, if not, it's going to be the same. You know, they're going to still keep bashing motherfuckers in the head and doing whatever they want to do. You know what? That's the funniest thing that I guess that I trip off of is the fact that all of this took place at Florence and Normandy, and I was in the middle of it.
He would later go on to say in an interview, "You get tired of those ass whippings. Time to start handing some ass whippings back." So the next couple classes will continue with the civil rights movement, transition into that, and continue with this theme of federal versus state governments and violence during